Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10.5 hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. Hi everyone, I'm your midwife, Tanya Tringali. Welcome to the Motherwit Podcast, a show about the issues that we, healthcare consumers, and providers face every day as we interact with the medical system. We'll talk about its blind spots, shortcomings, and share the strategies that we can use to feel seen and heard, no matter which side of the table we sit on. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. If you happen to have missed Season 1, Episode 12, I suggest you go back and have a listen before listening to this one. For those of you who are not going to do that, I totally get it. Most of the time when I find a new show, I just jump right in and don't look back. So I totally get it. So just to recap for those of you that are like me and are not going to go back and listen, my guest today is Rachel Mast, and she is a very talented athlete, gymnast, crossfitter. She actually does jujitsu competitively. She's a CrossFit Level 2 coach. She's a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, which is the main reason I brought her on today. But most importantly, she's a certified professional midwife who attends out-of-hospital births, both at birth center and at home. She'll correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I believe that to be the case. The birthing center is in Meridian, Idaho at New Beginnings Birth Center. So when she was on the show back in March, she was pregnant with her first baby and was suffering from hyperemesis. So we talked about that experience quite a bit. And we also talked about why coaching and midwifery are so well aligned for both of us. Basically, we shared a soapbox for the better part of an hour. But you know what? It's one of my best performing episodes to date. So I'm guessing that means you guys found this interesting. So with that said, I've brought her back to tell her birth story and to update us on her return to fitness. I'm particularly interested to hear what about her own experience was possibly unexpected, or what may have challenged her beliefs or changed her perspective. Because while I don't believe for a minute, for example, that someone has to have a baby in order to be a good midwife, it does provide perspective that you just can't get any other way. So I'm interested to hear how having a baby as a midwife may have changed her, and also how rehabbing her body in the postpartum period may affect how she works with others in the future. So we'll slowly unpack this. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me back. I really enjoyed our first conversation, and I'm excited to talk again today.
Awesome. Well, we're super happy to have you. All right. So how have things been before you jump into your birth story? Just curious how you've been.
Really incredible. The happiest I've ever been. And I feel like the most balanced. Just finding that groove with motherhood, with marriage, with midwifery. It's a lot of M's.
Sure is. That's
movement.
Awesome.
The other one, there's movement in there too. So yes. I'm finding my groove, and I'm really enjoying the postpartum period. My little guy is 4 months old, and it's really been an incredible time. I think part of that is in contrast to a very challenging pregnancy. As you mentioned, I had hyperemesis gravidarum. So for those who don't know, that's excessive nausea and vomiting, and for me it lasted all the way through to labor. So every day of my pregnancy, from about 4 weeks gestation to 39 weeks, I threw up every day, and I felt so much better afterwards that now it just feels like, wow, this is great. I'm doing awesome.
I can't remember if I ever asked you this before, but did you ever watch the Amy Schumer special?
I did, after you recommended it. Yeah, I did.
What did you make of that? Because it's so rare for someone to be like both of you, which was start in with the vomiting stupid early and really carry on all the way to the end, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think that, she obviously offers a unique perspective with all that humor. And really, there are times where you just kind of have to laugh about it, or it's hard to get through it. It can be so all-encompassing and really, in some ways, so dark. It's nice to be able to laugh about some of it, because there are times where you're like, okay, this is a really comical moment. We have to kind of appreciate that I'm throwing up in a Chick-fil-A bathroom, that I'm like trying to figure out, or, wherever it's happening, because that just is life. And you have to laugh about it sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, jump in and tell us your birth story. And of course, if that means you need to provide some details around the time leading up, feel free. I want you to just tell your story as completely as you could possibly tell it.
Okay. Sounds good. It's a really great story to tell. I had an incredible experience. My husband and I decided that we wanted to have a home birth with midwives. We knew that for a long time leading up to even before we conceived our son. And so we proceeded with that plan, and we worked with licensed midwives here in Idaho and had a really wonderful experience throughout the pregnancy. It was our goal to treat ourselves as much like first-time parents as possible, and not as a professional midwife and her husband. So we took childbirth classes, we hired a doula. I even listened to birth podcasts and listened to positive birth stories, even though as a licensed midwife, I have attended hundreds and hundreds of births over the last 12 years of being a midwife. I just felt like I couldn't get enough positive stories. So at night, I would take an Epsom salt bath and I would listen to birth stories and just try to continue to affirm what I already knew, which is that birth is normal. When you have a low risk, healthy pregnancy, typically things go well, and just really wanting to continue affirming that. And that really helped me go into the experience with a lot of confidence, even though I have seen my share of, complications and have seen loss. I just chose to trust that my body knew what it was doing. And I addressed the fears, but then moved on from them and just chose to approach birth from a place of confidence and trust.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by addressing the fears? I think our listeners who may be experiencing these feelings might be thinking exactly what I just said to you. Like, tell me more. How do you address those fears?
Yeah, I think for me, it felt more natural to just be like, no, like that won't happen to me. And that's what a lot of people would tell me if I tried to kind of go there with, well, what if I'm that person who transfers because I have a long tiring birth and I want an epidural? Or what if I'm the person who doesn't dilate past this many centimeters? And people would say, oh, that won't be you. It's like, well, we don't know that. So yeah. How can I process this? So what I did was I kind of went through worst case scenario all the way through, even to making like an actual birth plan, a written birth plan in case of hospital transfer, in case of needing a medical intervention, in case of C-section. Here are my wishes and my preferences, and trying to come to it with a place of, I like this language of commitment rather than attachment. So rather than having like attachment to this particular plan, being, committed to the idea of a physiologic birth. And I made the birth plan, and I talked with our doula and my husband about what my concerns were, and just vocalized everything, and then made a plan in case those things happened. And then I found that once the plan was in place, I could kind of let it go. I wasn't thinking about it anymore because I had already planned for it. So that helped me to just have a really practical written birth plan, and my doula and my husband and my midwives all knew about it. And then it was like folded and set aside, and I could then shift my focus and fill my mind with positivity and understanding that birth almost always goes very well. But it did help me to have a plan.
Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. You know I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started MotherWit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, Or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits. I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwhipmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Whip podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
Okay, so we had 2 due dates. We had an early ultrasound that had me due at the end of March, and then based on my period and my conception, it was more of like beginning of April. And so we discussed with our midwives using the later date, because as a first-time mom, I knew I was more likely to go over, and I thought that mentally that would help me to just kind of set my sights later. And then I told all of my friends and family that my due date was 2 weeks after that late due date.
Love it.
So that way no one was bothering me, and it really worked really well, to the point where when I went into labor at 39 weeks and 4 days, everybody thought that I was really, really early, when in fact I wasn't. But that was really nice, and I would recommend that to first-time moms. Just give people a due window, a due season, or add a couple weeks on there. That was really great. And yeah, as a result, labor really surprised me, because I had totally talked myself into, I'm going to go to 42 weeks. So when I didn't, it was really surprising, and I was in a bit of denial that I was actually going into labor.
I like denial when someone's going into labor.
Yeah.
I advise that frequently. And in part, it's because when I went into labor, I was not a midwife yet when I had my only child. I was that person who stupidly got too excited about being in labor and started pulling out all the tricks way too early. So of course I learned from experience. This is one of those things when I said, how has your experience changed the way you will practice? I look at this as one of those things that I could only learn from having had a baby. And I very actively tell people, as I'm sure you do, like something in the realm of ignore your labor for as long as you can. If your baby just falls out, God bless you, because the rest of us had to work really hard to get our babies out. Like, that's one of my standard lines, and it comes from my own experience. So yeah, those are really great moments of learning that really we can only get from the experience.
Yeah. And I was so committed to that idea of ignore that, again, totally in denial. So my labor started at 7:30 on a Sunday night. My husband and I were having dinner with my sisters and their husbands, and I had my first contraction. It was about 7:30 p.m. And I actually made a comment to my sister. I said, do you want to feel what a Braxton Hicks feels like? Like, this is what a practice contraction is. And my husband interjected, but it's not a real contraction, just so you know. Like, he's telling my sister that, these are just warm-up contractions. We've got weeks left. That's right. I worked on him too. So I really thought this is just normal end of pregnancy contractions. And we had dinner, and I was pretty uncomfortable I ate a huge T-bone steak. That was my final meal. I ate a lot of meat. I ate more than my husband by a long shot. And I was uncomfortable through dinner, just felt contractions periodically. My back felt kind of achy, my pelvis, my legs, just kind of squirming a little bit more. And my husband and I had talked about, in these last couple weeks of pregnancy, I'm really committed to going to bed early and getting as much rest as possible. So this family dinner, we're going to call it at like 8:30. We're going to get out of there and get home so I can go to bed. So, within an hour or two, we were on our way out. We're driving home, and I'm having contractions still. And I'm thinking, I can tell that these have some sort of frequency. I don't know what it is, but there's a pattern here. So I just started glancing at the clock, kind of noting the time that these contractions are happening, going, oh, wow, yeah, they're about every 6 minutes, lasting maybe 30 seconds. But I didn't mention anything to my husband. We listened to music. We talked on the drive home. And then I'd had a bout of contractions about a week prior, and getting into a warm Epsom salt bath had really calmed everything down pretty quickly. So I thought, I'll do that again tonight, and it'll make everything go away. And my husband noticed that, I was uncomfortable. I told him I'm having some of those contractions again, so I'm just going to get in the bath and make sure that things kind of calm down. But it definitely felt a little different. And I had this thought, I went to go to the bathroom and I thought, wouldn't it be funny if I had bloody show? And when I wiped, there was bloody show on the toilet paper. And that was when I had that, oh my gosh, this is it. And it wasn't even, maybe this is it. I just thought, yeah, this is going to lead to something. I don't know when. I mean, it might be 2 days from now that we have a baby, but this is the start of the real deal. And I was debating whether to tell my husband because it was bedtime, and I thought, I don't want us both to be up. We need to go to sleep. And I'm worried if I tell him, he's going to be too excited. So I was in the bath and contractions are still coming. They're not slowing down. If anything, maybe getting a little stronger. And my husband asked me, are the contractions still happening? I said, yep, just get your stuff ready for work for tomorrow. We're going to go about our lives. And then I asked him, you know what? When I do go into labor, do you want to know, get a heads up, or would you rather that I wait? And he said, no, I would want to know. I said, well, do you think it would keep you from sleeping if it happened at night? No, I don't think so. I said, okay, well, my contractions are about every 5 minutes and I have bloody show. And the look on his face was priceless because he was so excited, but he was really trying to play it cool because he knew that's what I wanted. We got to ignore this, got to go to bed. So yeah, we tried to go to sleep. He actually did fall asleep and I fell asleep for a little bit. I actually took a sleeping pill. I was so committed to the idea of going to sleep. Like these are, 5-6 minutes apart. They're short. I can totally either sleep through this or sleep between. So we got in bed. I took that sleeping pill and the contractions just started ramping up pretty quickly. My husband was trying to time them and I told him, don't time them, go to bed. But over the course of the next couple hours, I kept having to get up and go to the bathroom. Pretty soon, I was flipping over onto my hands and knees pretty instinctually just because it really was uncomfortable to have a contraction on my side. And I thought for sure I was just being a big drama queen. I thought, this is early labor. It's going to last for, 2 days. And here I am having to change positions. Pretty soon I'm vocalizing, moaning through the contraction, swaying my hips, and then the contraction would end and I'd think, what? A baby. Oh my gosh. I have to be able to rest through these. It's too early. But things were just progressing a lot faster than I knew. And my husband was tuning into that. He kind of started timing contractions, suggested we call our doula. This was about midnight. So things have been going since 7:30, but we're now getting more active. So contractions about 3 minutes apart, lasting a minute, and I'm definitely working through them, but feeling okay in between. So I was using that as my gauge or my excuse for why we didn't need to tell our doula. Because I said, I'm fine in between. Look at me, I'm talking to you. I'm fine.
You're like, I'm not entirely in labor land yet, so I'm
exactly.
cool.
Exactly. So just pump the brakes. Let's, if this is going to last for a day or more, I don't want my whole team exhausted. And he was able to find a way for us to get the doula there. And that was because our dog needed to be dropped off at my sister's house. And he said, well, I don't want to leave you alone while I run the dog over to your sister's. And I thought, I don't really want to be alone either. These contractions they're pretty intense. And I wanted him there. So I said, okay, call the doula so that she can be with me while you take the dog. And that's how he ended up getting the doula to come, even though I wasn't sure that it was time. Took her about an hour to get there. I think she arrived maybe about 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was pretty out of it. I was trying to explain that I wasn't out of it, but I couldn't form proper sentences. So I labored mostly on my bed, on hands and knees, in the dark, and I tried to listen to my hypnobirthing app at one point, and it drove me crazy, even though I listened to it a lot in pregnancy to help me fall asleep. It just was not working for me in labor.
What about it? Did you find it, what about it? Was it just annoying because you're like, this is acting like I'm supposed to be able to get all zen and I can't do it? What was the thought?
I think that the pace, it was too slow for how intense things felt. And it was also distracting. Almost like having someone talk to you during a contraction. I didn't want someone else's voice. So I just wanted my own moaning. The only sound I wanted to hear was myself. I didn't even want my husband talking to me. So I think it was just too distracting. It made the pain feel worse to have her voice in my head.
Got it. And
so
up until this
that did
point,
not work.
Up until this point, no one was touching you, right?
No. Yeah, my husband would kind of rub my back in between contractions, but I was moving quite a bit, like swaying my hips back and forth, and kind of I think it was tough to put pressure on my back because I was moving. And I wasn't even able to articulate, hey, push here, do this. Mm-hmm. So just having his presence was great. That was reassuring to me, but I was pretty much doing it on my own. I didn't feel like I really needed anything else. Mm-hmm. And then when my doula came, she started to do the double hip squeeze and some sacral pressure, and that felt incredible. So I thought, I didn't really realize that I needed that until I had it, and now please don't stop. That feels so good. So when she arrived, I was attempting to labor on the toilet, and that was miserable. Contractions just felt a lot more intense sitting down. So I would be sitting on the toilet in between, and then once the contraction came, I would get down onto my hands and knees and kneel over the tub, or I would stand and kneel over the sink, but kind of leaning forward was really helpful, and moving my hips. But yeah, I was laboring in the dark, and it was very quiet. Now it's 2 or 3 in the morning, it's dark outside. And I started getting really warm. Before I would be hot during a contraction and then cold in between. Now I was just warm. So I took off my shirt, and my doula was fanning me. I was vocalizing a lot, and our doula suggested, let's give the midwives at least a heads up call. So they got the heads up call, and then within about 20 or 30 minutes, our doula said, call them to come, like it's time. And of course, in my head, I'm going, no, it's too early. And I tried to express that. But again, I couldn't even form a proper sentence. I was just so out of it already, really in labor land. But there was a part of me that was just worried that it would last a long time, and I didn't want everybody to be tired. But I was glad that she called the midwives, because things just continued to get really intense. We weren't prepared. The home wasn't ready for our birth because we were thinking we would go another couple weeks. So my husband was rushing around in between contractions, getting things going. So every contraction, he somehow managed to be there with me. But then in between, he was inflating the birth tub, hanging twinkle lights and birth affirmations, gathering my snacks and my electrolyte drinks, changing the bedding, double make the bed with the waterproof mattress protector, and then rushing back, so every 2 to 3 minutes, he's getting his little break to run and do things. And
he was doing like CrossFit sprints in between.
Absolutely. Functional fitness at its finest.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So my midwives arrived about 3:30, I think, and they checked my vitals and listened to the baby, and I was really relieved that they were there. I remember feeling a lot of peace having them there. And the next thing kind of requires a little bit of an explanation. So throughout my pregnancy, I mentioned really wanting to fill my mind with positive birth stories. And it occurred to me that, as a midwife, I've attended, it's over 500 births. I don't know the exact count, but 500 or so out of hospital births. And I thought about all these incredible experiences, all these beautiful births and things that I had learned through the mothers that I'd cared for as a midwife, all these lessons and resilience that my clients had taught me over the years. And I wanted a way to somehow have that as like a physical representation in my birth space. So I took to writing out the name of every mother that I'd caught a baby for. It kind of made it like an art project. I'm not a very artistic person, but sort of had their names swirling in different colors across this paper that I wanted to hang in my birth space so that I could see that and remember birth is normal, and be reassured of that and be able to draw strength from all of these moms. And I wasn't even sure if I would utilize it, because that happens sometimes. Moms prepare for things in their birth, they don't even end up using it. They swear, I'm going to have a water birth, and then they hate the water. Or I'm going to add this beautiful playlist, and they don't even touch it. In fact, we had prepared a playlist, and at one point my husband said, do you want me to play it? And I said, no, it's playing in my head. So I had music in my head, just mentally, songs I was kind of humming and that were playing in my mind, but I didn't want to hear it externally. So just one of those funny things that crazy laboring women say, like, no, the music's in my head. It's like, okay, crazy. You're hearing voices? But anyway, right after the midwives got there, I had asked to get in the tub. And so they had prepared the water for me. And when I came out into our living room, first of all, it was transformed into a beautiful birth space thanks to my husband. But I noticed the sheet, the paper with all the names. And I walked over to it and I placed both of my hands open against it. And I read the names and just honestly started remembering births, remembering these mothers and their strength and fortitude. And it truly shored me up and gave me strength. I was surprised when I look back. I thought, wow, I didn't know that it would be that powerful for me in labor, but it really did give me that oomph right as I was going into transition. So I got into the water. I hadn't been checked, and that was one of my requests, was unless there's a clinical indication, I don't see the need to have cervical exams unless we feel like it would change the course of action or it's needed at some point. But in terms of just a way to measure progress, there's other ways we can do that, and I don't need that information. So we were just going off of my contractions, the pattern, longer, stronger, closer together, and my behavior, as I was becoming more and more more drawn inward, not engaging with people, vocalizing my movement and sounds. So that's what we were going off of to gauge progress. And so I could tell that I was getting closer, and my team could as well. And as I got into the water, it was kind of a tricky time because my contractions increased in intensity so much. At that time, the water really didn't do much for me. And I remember being so excited thinking, oh, it's the midwife's epidural. The water's going to feel so great. And then I had my first contraction in the water and I thought, this is it? Are you kidding? This is all the pain relief I'm going to get from the water. I almost got out. And I thought, let's just give it a little bit of time. And then honestly, I was just too out of it to really think about doing anything different. I was just approaching each contraction as it came. Some contractions I was kneeling, leaning forward. Sometimes I would kind of recline back or be on my hands and knees or squatting. There was a point where I even got into like a deep lunge, which I thought was really interesting because no one coached me to do that, but somehow my body knew it needed to do that. And maybe that's because the baby was, rotating and changing position, and that was helping. But somehow my body knew to do that, and left undisturbed, I was finding these different positions on my own without anyone telling me, hey, Rachel, lift this leg, do this, now try that. I was just moving instinctually. I got really warm, so my husband was doing all the cold washcloths, sips of cold water, had the little fan on my face, was being very encouraging. My doula was doing some massage and pressure on my back when she could reach me in the water. And I was just doing, one contraction at a time. At a point, I got pretty tired and started to fall asleep in between contractions. And then I would wake up to a contraction, which was really intense. So I had the thought, okay, maybe I need to really stay awake, and then I can anticipate the next contraction so that it doesn't catch me off guard. But I knew that by doing so, I would be holding tension, waiting for that contraction, and I needed to relax. So I chose to just let everything go. One of my affirmations was add nothing extra. So just let the contraction, be as big as it needs to be, but don't add anything with my own effort. Just let it move through me. So I relaxed, just kind of became limp in between, would rest my head, close my eyes, and sometimes fall asleep. And then the next contraction would come. Pretty soon I started feeling a building pressure in my bottom. And I thought, okay, I think baby's coming down. So I actually reached in and felt the baby's head with my fingers. And I could feel that there was a little bit of cervix still. I didn't consciously check myself, but I could just tell, okay, that's cervix. And rather than assessing it for a dilation very formally, I just told myself, okay, you still got work to do. That's okay. and just kind of went back to it. But then, that pressure was increasing. At one point, I could feel the bag of waters bulging like a little water balloon. So that was pretty exciting to feel that. And then I started to feel the baby's head kind of coming under my pubic bone and rocking back and forth. A lot of moms get really frustrated at that point because they feel the progress of the baby's head moving under, and then it gets sucked back up. Mm-hmm. And so I was aware that that was happening. And there was a couple points where it occurred to me that, I could be pushing for a long time. This could go on for a while. But then there was like another part of my brain that would take over and say, but it's not going to take a long time. It's going great. And I would almost midwife myself through those moments.
I knew that's what you were about to say.
Yeah. And it didn't feel so much like a tug of war. I was worried about that. Okay, as a clinical provider, am I going to be assessing every moment of my own labor? And there were parts of me that would kind of pop up, but then the other part of my midwife brain would just sweep right through that and encourage myself. And I was talking out loud to myself at points and, telling myself, you're doing so great. You're doing awesome. At one point, my doulist thought I was talking to her. So she said, can you repeat that? And I said, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my body. So just really in a good place, in a really good place. And I even thought at a few points, this is going really, really well. And I still felt like I was able to be in that part of my head where I wasn't thinking too much. And if I did start to think again, it was like I could I moved through that okay without it being a struggle or too much of that tug of war, which was really a wonderful experience. And so at the point when I was feeling baby's head kind of going forward and back, I even thought to myself, okay, we probably have about 20 minutes, because I was thinking just based off of experience, it's about 20 minutes of that forward and back. And that's about what it was. And I was really quiet at this point. I had gone from making some pretty big, loud noises through contractions, and now in this kind of pushing phase, which in all lasted about an hour, I was very quiet. Wasn't really responding to anyone, wasn't speaking at all, and wasn't vocalizing. There's some video footage and I barely make a peep. You can almost not tell I'm having a contraction. Just very small grunts at the peak of the contraction. It was very gentle. No one was coaching me on how to push. My body was just doing it instinctually. And pretty soon I felt the sensation of crowning, and that was intense for sure. There's a reason why people call it the ring of fire. And I supported my own perineum, just kind of holding the baby's head with my hand. And my team, they knew I was pushing, but they didn't realize I was that close because of how quiet I was. And honestly, nobody was staring at my crotch, watching every contraction and every moment. And it was dark. And so no one was measuring my progress in that kind of way. And so when the baby's head started to kind of slip out, I said out loud to the room, baby. And my husband was kind of like, is she just saying that? And I said, I feel a little bit of hair. And my husband brushed hair off of my neck, thinking I was talking about myself. And I said, no, the baby. And everybody kind of looks and realizes, oh, the head, it was just born. So the head was born, and I was holding the baby's head in my hand. We didn't know if it was a boy or girl. And we had that little pause in between that contraction and the next. And it was really amazing. I kind of had almost a moment of clarity to be able to feel the baby's hair. I said, I feel the baby's ear. And then I thanked everyone for being there. So I could really see my team. And I said, thank you all for being here. I love you so much. And then I knew one more contraction. So I was talking to the baby and I said, good job, baby. One more contraction, just one more. And then on the next contraction, I let out a pretty big grunt to deliver the shoulders. And the baby was born into my hands. I brought the baby up onto my chest. And the baby started crying. And of course, I'm crying and I'm talking to the baby. Good job, baby. And my husband's right there. And there was probably a minute where we're just talking to the baby and noticing features before we even saw if it was a boy or girl. So then at that point we look and we see it's a boy. And I exclaimed, "We have a son." And I'm just bawling, my son, with him at my chest. And he had let out his first cries, and then he's just alert and looking at us. And we had probably 20 minutes where we just got to look at him and enjoy him. I had opted to get a shot of Pitocin within a minute of birth, knowing that I was pretty depleted in my pregnancy from hyperemesis. I also was anemic, and I had an iron infusion in my 3rd trimester, and I felt pretty strongly that my body would not tolerate a hemorrhage. And so my husband and I did the research, and a shot of Pitocin within a minute of birth has really good success at reducing hemorrhage. So that gave us all, I think, some confidence and some room to be in that moment without being as concerned about my bleeding, because I had that shot, which was really nice, because we just were able to soak up that time. After about 20 minutes, my sister cut the cord when it was finished pulsing, and then I opted to give baby over to dad so I could kind of focus on the placenta, which I then delivered myself. I just did some cord traction, kind of got into a squat and helped facilitate the birth of the placenta. And then my midwives helped me out of the tub and into my bed, and we got back skin to skin with baby, and he latched really quickly, nursed vigorously on both sides without any problems. After about an hour, the midwives did his exam right there in our room, everything at the foot of our bed so we could see. He was weighed, and he was actually 8 pounds, 5 ounces, which is pretty good size considering I threw up most of my food for 9 months.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, but I was 8'3". My husband was 7'15" when he was born. So we're probably going to have an 8-ish pounder. That's kind of what we were. And yeah, the midwives, monitored us, helped me get cleaned up after a while. I took a shower, and they brewed me tea and brought me snacks, and it was just amazing. The sun was coming up at that point. So he was born he was born just after 6 a.m. So it was a 11 and a half hour total labor. And I would say, it would have been about 6 hours of that was more of the active labor and about an hour of pushing. So really quite short for a first time mom, but I felt like it was enough time to present challenge and for me to experience labor. It wasn't like it was 1 hour long and it just felt like I was totally caught off guard. So I was really pleased with the length. It was all through the night, so I was tired, but of course you get that adrenaline and you're just so excited. We were high as kites, so happy. The midwives left after a couple hours. They gave us our instructions, and they did postpartum care in our home over that next week. So they came to see us, and our doula came to see us, and our chiropractor came to adjust me and the baby, our lactation consultant. So we had lots of wonderful in-home care in that first week. But yeah, that birth, we were just over the moon. It was the best night of our lives. We were so happy. When we finally fell asleep and took a big nap with the baby, we woke up and we were starving. We had a friend bring us burgers and fries, and I didn't throw it up for the first time in months, and I just felt so good. My nausea was instantly gone with the birth. I threw up in labor at one point, and that was the last time I threw up. I haven't thrown up since, which was just really remarkable after the year I had.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
A couple questions.
Yeah.
How was your perineum?
I had a 1st-degree laceration that I opted not to have sutured. I actually asked to see it. I said, "Can you bring me a mirror? Let me assess it." So definitely had a little midwife moment. And it was so superficial that it was well approximated. So wasn't, gaping or causing any problems, wasn't bleeding. So I just said, let's leave it, let it heal on its own. And yeah, 1st-degree tear.
And the other question is about your chiropractor. Was your chiropractor more for you, for your baby, both of you?
Both of us.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a really wonderful chiropractor here. Shout out to Dr. Anniker. She's got 20 years of experience. She's Webster certified, so she really specializes in pregnancy, but also newborn and pediatric. So she offers for patients that are established in her care to come to the home really as soon as you'd like, to have an adjustment for baby and for mom. So I got adjusted first, and then my son was adjusted, and he was just wide-eyed and quiet, really alert, kind of looking at her, very calm. It's really pretty relaxing to watch a pediatric chiropractic adjustment. It's very gentle. It kind of reminds me of infant massage. So for those who are like, chiropractic care, like cracking babies' necks, it looks very different than what it would look like on an adult. And it's, very, very, very gentle. So we both were adjusted about 12 hours after the birth.
Very cool. I'm actually having a chiropractor on in a few weeks. So you may be aware of this person because she also makes breastfeeding and pumping bras. Carly Cossey. She's a crossfitter and a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. So she'll be on soon talking about chiropractic care and fitness in the postpartum period as well. So kind of cool. I'm glad that you mentioned that because I was just working on, organizing my thoughts for her show before we got on. And one of the things I wrote down that I wanted to talk about was that so many people, so many of my own clients express so much fear about chiropractic care. And I really want to understand more why that is and what we can maybe do to dispel some of those myths that are out there, because it's so wonderful. And I love that you commented on how gentle it is and you equated it to infant massage. I tend to think of it looking a little more closer to craniosacral in a way, because it's so gentle. So anyway, regardless of how that all plays out, I think that's a memo I want everyone to hear, is how gentle that can be. And that we have great needs. The baby was just, kind of tucked in there real tight and goes through a lot of movements to get out, and what we go through for 9 months, right? So Absolutely. That's awesome. All right, so let's change gears a little bit and let's talk a little bit about, take me through how you felt physically in the early days postpartum, and when you started making time and space for yourself to check in, and just take me through. We both already know what this process looks like, but I want our listeners to hear what the process of physical recovery with the goal of re-engaging in physical activity and exercise looks like for someone.
Yeah, so I felt amazing. I would say the first maybe 36 hours. I was just on a high. I wasn't nauseous. I could eat. And then all the soreness kind of set in. I definitely did too much in that first 36 hours, even though I felt like I was doing nothing. I still was sitting more than I was laying down. And even though our visits from family were short, they were frequent. And so I learned a lot there. And my husband helped me to kind of navigate that, where we ended up really just kind of not accepting visitors at all. And that was a much better move for us. So I definitely felt pretty sore in my perineum, especially. That was the biggest issue. I had developed pretty severe hemorrhoids in my pregnancy from all of the vomiting, as well as some stress incontinence. So I would, every time that I threw up, I would pee. And I worked with a pelvic floor physical therapist, but ultimately it was just so hard to counter that. When I was throwing up 5-10 times a day, it just was too difficult. It was just so much demand on my pelvic floor. So everything felt really swollen and tender. And I ended up on day 3, I did a telehealth visit with my pelvic floor PT, and she gave me some exercises to be doing at home, mostly just kind of waking up my core, getting things re-engaged, kind of understanding how to activate my muscles again, and just simple things I could be doing at home. I didn't think much about returning to, fitness or any kind of activity. I just really worked on lying in for a good 2 weeks. We didn't leave the house for 2 weeks. My husband was off of work, so it was really just us in our little bubble, and he took care of everything. I nursed and worked on, establishing a good supply of milk for my son. And he made sure that I got 1 or 2 baths every day to soak my muscles. And I had gotten that adjustment from my chiropractor. And then around the 2-week mark, that was our first outing, was back to the chiropractor for another adjustment. But I focused a lot on just resting and then nutrition, just eating a lot of wholesome foods and hydrating like crazy, because that breastfeeding thirst is real.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Never been so thirsty. And then, of course, just resting as much as we could. And even if I wasn't sleeping, I would just tell myself, just rest. Even if you can't sleep, just close your eyes and rest your body. So that was the first 2 weeks. I didn't try to go on any walks, or I had ideas of things I could do. I know, like Brianna Battles, who created the Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism Coach certification. She has a really great resource on 6 exercises for the first 6 weeks postpartum. Some things you can start in the very beginning. And I just rested. I thought I might do those things, and I didn't. I just rested and ate and nursed, and really worked on establishing that bond with my son and my husband.
Awesome. I love that. And that is in line with my general advice, people who are a little anxious to get back to it, I'm often trying to slow them down a little bit. Mm-hmm. But even people who present as someone who I might think will be that way, usually the second the baby's out and you realize how little sleep you're actually going to get and how much work is going into breastfeeding and just like waiting out the time to feel better. Mm-hmm. Most people kind of realize that those first 2 weeks, there's not a whole lot to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's great. That sounds really good. All right, carry on.
So we also had some things we were working on with breastfeeding. I kind of had to down-regulate my supply. I had quite a bit of milk. We had to work on that with a lactation consultant. And then my son had his tongue and lip ties both revised at 3 weeks postpartum. So we were kind of working through some of those hiccups as well. And then once that was all kind of cleared up, we're about 3 weeks postpartum. My husband's back at work, and that's when I have to start doing things more on my own. So I'm, taking care of things around the house and having to get to appointments by myself. And so it was just kind of navigating that. I still really wasn't very interested in resuming a lot of activity. And I kind of looked at it as I want to prioritize my bond with my son as the most important thing: breastfeeding, rest, and nutrition. I feel like if I can get those things as solid as I can, then I'll have a solid foundation to put exercise on. And so I just would check in with myself about every week to see, how are we doing on those other 4 things? And do I feel ready to add another piece? Because the way I look at it is, there is a point as a mother, you make sacrifices, like I'm going to set aside an hour to exercise, and I'm not going to be actively like with my kids. Maybe it's my husband is watching my son and I go and I spend an hour exercising. And you might say, well, you that's an hour you could be with your son, and it's that precious time. How can you leave? There's a point where you make a sacrifice, because I want to be healthy for him. I want to be my best self. I'm a practicing midwife. I need to be my best for the clients. But I found that there was a point in that really early postpartum where it felt like that was not an appropriate kind of sacrifice. I felt like something else would have to give, where I hadn't figured out breastfeeding enough yet. Like, we weren't solid there yet. I'm really not sleeping much at all. And like, I don't think that I can add that challenge. Mm-hmm. It felt like, hey, exercise should be, for the most part, a deposit in your bank account. Mm-hmm. This feels like it would be a withdrawal. Mm-hmm. I would be like taking, and I don't have enough yet to give for exercise. It's going to be taking something away from one of these other areas. Like I'd be, missing an opportunity to spend some time cooking some nutritious food, or missing an opportunity to rest, or having to do something funky with breastfeeding, where maybe I'm trying to hurry up and nurse and get out the door. And it was just too early. It just felt too early to me. So I saw my midwives and my pelvic floor physical therapist. I was cleared to return to activity, right, at that magic 6-week mark. I had been bleeding. I would say I bled pretty much like a medium to light period for about 2 weeks. And then I just spotted for several weeks, probably up until about that 6-week mark, I just spotted. And that was definitely a criteria where I knew as long as I'm still bleeding in any way, I don't feel comfortable returning to exercise or adding any challenge. But then even at 6 weeks, when I was, quote, cleared, I was told my diastasis was very minimal, not even a finger width, but a fingertip, with pretty good approximation. I was not having any pelvic floor symptoms. So even though I had that stress incontinence in pregnancy, in my postpartum, if I sneezed or coughed, no issues at all. Right. It was all cleared up. And my internal exams with my pelvic floor PT were wonderful, good strength, but also being able to relax my muscles. And yet I still felt like I needed more time because I was still thinking about those other pillars. So again, bond, breastfeeding, sleep, and nutrition. And I just kept checking in with myself. And it was about 8 weeks postpartum that I thought, I feel like I could add an extra piece. I feel ready to try something. I don't know what it's going to look like. It probably won't be much, but I'm ready to add a little bit of challenge. So it was 8 weeks postpartum that I first put on athletic wear and went to the gym with any intention of moving. And I started very, very slow. So my approach definitely was that progressive overload. One of my, like a perspective that I have and that I share with my clients that I coach as a fitness instructor. Throughout your pregnancy, you find yourself needing to modify more the further into the pregnancy you get. You just have to continue to make adjustments. And where you maybe started, if you were, say, like 10 weeks pregnant to where you are at 9 months pregnant, it looks very different. So you just kind of keep modifying things more and more and more to that end of pregnancy. And then I look at that end of pregnancy as kind of a starting point and work your way backwards. So I kind of started with things I was doing around 9 months postpartum. So really no deliberate core work at all. I wasn't doing planks and sit-ups. It was too much demand. That might have looked like more of I'm laying on my back and I'm breathing with my diaphragm and I'm visualizing pulling my, hip bones together and I'm engaging my core and doing my rehab. And then I'm on the bike a little bit, pedaling at a pretty slow pace, or I'm doing some farmer's carries, walking pretty slowly, but just being very deliberate with my movement. And I was watching for the 3 Ps, which you are the one who brought that to my attention, and I love it so much. So do I have pressure? Do I have pain? Do I have peeing? So watching for those things, but then also monitoring for anything in the 24 hours that would follow.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because I was finding, okay, these things feel great right now, but it could be that in 2 hours, I'm like, holy cow, it feels like there's a rock in my vagina. What is happening? So I watched that really carefully too.
Cool. Awesome. Loving it. Oh my God.
And I just, I started really slow. I did some like hip and glute activation with some resistance bands. Honestly, I started a lot of movements with a PVC pipe, and then I would move to like an empty 15-pound bar, then an empty 35-pound bar, just kind of re-drilling movement patterns.
So technique focused.
Yep. Technique focused for sure. And again, just implementing a lot of the same modifications I had used in pregnancy. I was very aware of my breath. This was huge in helping me kind of control my pace. So I made sure if there was any movements that required me to hold my breath, I knew that that was too much challenge at that point. So I made it really until very recently. So about 14 weeks postpartum, like 4 months or so. No breath hold at all. I would make sure that I could exhale through the challenging part of the movement so that I could make sure that my pelvic floor was at its strongest point. So for those who are listening, on an inhale, our pelvic floor relaxes, and on the exhale, it has that recoil or contraction, so it's better supported. And so I would just make sure that as I was moving, I was very conscious of my breath. And if I found myself holding my breath, I knew this is too much challenge for my body right now. And I continued working with my pelvic floor physical therapist beyond 6 weeks. So she was also giving me exercises to rehabilitate my core very deliberately from the inside out, working to use my deep core muscles, not just the muscles that show, not just like our 6-pack muscles, but deep in our core. Working on activating those was huge. So yeah, lots of breathing through the entire range of motion, working on what we call the 360 breath. So breathing wide into my diaphragm, into my ribs, not just breathing down into my pelvic floor. That was huge. And I was also very aware of positioning from pregnancy. For example, like the classic rib flare, where with our growing belly, ribs start to flare up. Just being aware that there might be some tendencies that were from my pregnancy or some compensations from postpartum. For example, that posterior pelvic tilt, we hold our babies kind of drawing our hips forward, or shoulders are more rounded from nursing. So I was really careful to look for those compensations and try to rehabilitate those areas and create, strength in those spots. And then I mentioned really deliberately choosing not to do direct core movements. So sit-ups, toes to bar, flutter kicks, and also high impact. So running, jumping rope, box jumps, just were an absolute no. There's some really good research that supports not returning to high impact movement until 6 months postpartum. So I plan to just continue to substitute those movements until closer to 6 months. And then my intention would be that slow introduction. So I'm not going to go out and run a mile the first day. It might be jogging 100 meters and then walking 100 meters. And that's, you do 2 rounds of that. And then we're going to monitor for symptoms and wait a day. And then we're going to add a little bit more. So it's a very slow process, but my mom always told me that slow and steady wins the race. So that's my motto. Or in the pregnancy postpartum athleticism world, we like to say intention now for intensity later. So that's really been my mantra. And really, it's just been probably in the last week that I've been gradually really increasing my weights to find more of a challenge in my loading. So that hasn't been, I haven't really been trying to like go heavy, but that's just been something I've kind of started adding in the last week or so. And again, still monitoring for symptoms.
And have you had any?
I have, actually. So it took a while for it to show up. What I have experienced is some of that, like the fullness in my vagina. I wouldn't call it like a painful pressure, but just like a little bit heavier on movements that require me to absorb impact. So I've noticed it on clean and jerks. So when I clean the weight to my shoulder and catch, and then when I go to then push it up overhead, and also on push presses, mostly when I'm bringing the weight down to my shoulder. So it's absorbing impact. So with that, I've been playing with some different strategies, some things in my positioning and in my breath. But ultimately what I'm noticing is a symptom threshold. So I'm good for a while, 10 reps or something. And then as I get more tired, the symptoms start showing up. So I'm finding that it's easiest for me to control it by reducing my reps or my weight.
Oh, I love it. This is exactly the way I talk to people about approaching this. So using double unders as the example, or just even single unders, whatever, just jumping rope, right? So it's the case that someone might feel good for some number of reps.
Yep.
But there's that point where you cross over. And so you have to be able to have this like conversation with yourself. Okay, 8 was the magic number. I need to bring it back to 5, let's say. And nobody's saying that there's some magic formula. And I think that's where people get really hung up, is they want something so specific. And it's like, whatever the number was, bring it back a bit. Bring it back as much as you want. And then take a break and go with that lower number again. And then the question is, how many times can you do that before your symptom threshold happens at the 5th rep instead of the 8? So now you know, okay, I've got 5 reps with a 30-second break 5 times, and I feel great. That's what we're looking for. And what I remind people all the time is that it's okay to experiment. It's okay to hit your symptom threshold once or twice while you're finding it. It's not okay to bust through your symptom threshold over and over and over again, right? So no matter what movement you're doing, you're just trying to find it. If you don't try to find it, you don't know where it is.
Right, exactly. And I did have to try a couple different strategies to find what worked. Because again, it was like, okay, well, we'll try adjusting position. We'll try adjusting my breath. And that was sort of helpful, but the biggest help was finding that the threshold of reps and being able to reduce it or know when I need to take a break. And then I'm just trying to kind of work up to more, have more stamina. But I think one thing that people expect, especially in the CrossFit world where people are so used to just gunning it, you kind of turn off your brain and you just go. And it's a really great feeling. It's super fun to just be able to push yourself and not think about it. But the reality is that in that immediate postpartum, it's just not really possible to totally turn your brain off and just go. And you kind of have to be okay with taking that approach of experimentation. And even if it means it takes twice as long, or you have to stop and adjust and maybe do a different movement, unload your bar, whatever that is, I have to approach things like that right now. Like the intensity will continue to come, but right now that intention does require me to be a lot more aware of what I'm doing. And that's just where I'm at right now. Someday I'll be able to just shut it off and go. That'd be really fun. Sure. But right now we're not there. So it can be frustrating. I think I'm in a good headspace with it, but I know that a lot of people would be really frustrated by that, just having to be so aware and so mindful. And then, I have to adjust it or I have to take a break again. I don't want to put the bar down. I just want to bust through this and be done. But I'm trying to rebuild from the inside out so that I can have the ability to have sport and athleticism through my whole life, not just in this period of my 30s right now. I want to be doing something when I'm 50, 60, 70. I don't know what it will be, but it's been gymnastics and softball and jujitsu and CrossFit and weightlifting. And I'd love to try new things for my whole life. I want to have that perspective that I'm building something now so that I can continue to move. And I don't want to get so short-sighted that with this one workout and feeling competitive that I have to finish it in a certain amount of time. So it is a mental adjustment. Got to really slow things down for sure and be very aware and be willing to, make adjustments as you go.
Yeah, cool. Okay, here's another question for you. Have you experienced in this time that sounds like you started working towards recovery around 6 weeks postpartum, you're 4 months now. Have you had times where you planned to go to the gym, you thought you knew what you were going to do, but you had a rough night and you said, you know what, I'm just going to call it. We're not going today because my cortisol's already out the roof from lack of sleep and I don't need more cortisol from this workout. So have you had that?
Yeah, that's kind of back to that like deposits or withdrawals where I just have to be honest with myself. Is this going to be more harm than help? Is this going to be a withdrawal from the bank account or a deposit? And sometimes it's even just trying to get out the door at a certain time, like, I want to make it for the 8:30 class, but my son wants to cluster feed or wants to be held for his nap. And I just choose to prioritize that and say, you know what, we'll go a little bit later. Like we'll just have to change the plan, or it looks different. Or where I've brought him, this happened more in the beginning when we're really still trying to figure out feeding and he was nursing more frequently, where, he would wake up and be crying in the middle of the workout and I just had to stop and nurse him. And sometimes I was able to finish the workout, and then there were some days where I couldn't for whatever reason. Maybe we had somewhere we had to get, and so I just didn't finish it that day. And I just sat there and nursed, and I watched the class, finished the workout, and I sat there and breastfed. So I've had to keep a pretty open mind about that too. Just priorities for me. Yeah.
Good. I want people to hear these stories of people working through this, because I think in just sitting back and listening to you talk, because you are coming from a place of great knowledge, I know it's harder for people for whom they may not have this bodily experience or the vocabulary for it, but in just listening, they're getting a little bit more, and they're getting ideas of ways to approach this. I think it's really beautiful. So as we move towards wrapping up, I want to remind you of the things that I wanted to hear from you the most, and we'll take them kind of one at a time. I'm really curious for you to tell me, one or two as they come to you, whether it's about your pregnancy, your birth, your postpartum recovery, back to that idea of what did you find that was really unexpected, that challenged your beliefs, or that changed your perspective as it pertains to how you work with people moving forward. So looking at the whole spectrum of everything you've been through.
This feels like a interesting observation, but I think that hyperemesis for me was a gift because I had to adjust my mindset so early in my pregnancy. I always wanted and always thought I would be that person that worked out through her whole pregnancy. And I honestly thought, even as a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, this will be such a great time to get a bunch of footage and photos of me working out that I can use for my clients. I could build this, I had this whole business plan. And then I wasn't able to work out in the way that I wanted to. But I feel like it was such a gift because it just showed me how short these seasons are. Pregnancy is such a short season. And even this immediate postpartum is so brief in comparison to my whole life. And I've been in athletics my whole life. And so to think about even a year and a half or 2 years of more deliberate prehab and rehab is not that much time. So the gift is that I feel like postpartum, I've been surprised at how easygoing I've been and how flexible. But I feel like building the bond, the breastfeeding, the nutrition, and the sleep has been it's worked so well for me. I am excited to see how I can share that with my clients moving forward and really encourage that, because it's just been really incredible to not have that pressure of performance and of returning to my former self. So I don't know if that really answers it, but again, it's like hyperemesis was a gift because it got me to slow down and recognize how short the season was. And then it changed my perspective on how I rebuilt, and having that foundation I've never regretted building that foundation in those first 8 weeks. It has only served me well. And I think I'm coming back stronger. I think that women have there's that opportunity to come back stronger, because when you rehabilitate and you slow down and you can recognize weaknesses, you can work on that deep core engagement and kind of slowly rebuild. I just don't think you're going to come back weaker when all is said and done. So that's been cool to experience firsthand, and I'm excited to see how that shows up in my work as a midwife and as a coach.
Yeah, it sounds like not that you were ever going to be rigid, because I think the beliefs that we both hold about how to approach this are, in essence, the opposite of rigid. But it sounds like that little bit of athlete brain that you might have brought to this just got knocked out of you early on because of the hyperemesis. And so now you've had a vastly different experience than the one you believed you understood. So this is, again, coming back to going through something personally as opposed to just learning it academically, for lack of a better word, gives you this sense of, okay, this is one way, the way I always understood that I learned from someone else. But there's this complete other way that I have experienced. And now I can see an even broader spectrum of possibilities of how to individualize for my clients as a midwife, all the way segueing into that weird gray zone that we live in as both coaches and midwives, and then all the way into when you are actually wearing your coach hat. So that's super cool. And, I'll needle you one last time just to see if you can do it. Is there anything that you will do differently as a midwife or as a coach because of your experience that's like really concrete, or did it not happen that way for you? And that's okay if there's not an answer to that.
I think that I have a lot more grace now, understanding. You'd think I would already have believed this, but you can do all the things right and you're still dealt cards that you didn't want. I think I worked really hard on my preconception health, really hard. And I had a very challenging pregnancy and ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for 9 months and was very, very sick, even though I did, quote, everything right. And even in my pregnancy, I still really tried to do everything the right way. And I feel like I got really lucky, and I am very blessed to have a wonderful birth and an easy postpartum. But I think that I have more grace now, understanding that even if you do all the right things, you just don't, you're dealt cards, whether it's in, pregnancy, for your birth, for your breastfeeding journey, for your return to fitness. And so I do feel like I have a lot more grace and understanding. I've had opportunities already. There's a lot of moms having babies at our gym right now. And so I'm watching and walking through a lot of moms through postpartum, and not everyone is choosing to rehabilitate in the way that I did. But I'm recognizing and having grace that like fitness means something different for different people. For me, it wasn't the most important thing. I had a lot of really great support at home, and I had a lot of resources to be able to build this beautiful foundation. But there are people who have breastfeeding struggles, who have postpartum depression, who are single mothers, or have, they don't have the same partner support, lack of finances or resources. And I've seen that for some people, fitness is like, it's a mental health piece. And I've equated it like if someone took you off your antidepressant and that was like your only thing you had. If fitness was your antidepressant and they took that away from you, how eager would you be to get back in there and get moving after you have your baby? And I just had this flip because I was watching kind of from a place of judgment, because I felt like I was rehabilitating so appropriately. And then recognizing that a lot of that is privilege from where I have a lot of resources, and I had, we planned the pregnancy, within this committed, loving marriage, and we had the financial resources. We set aside money to have our lactation consultant and our doula. And I have some of that knowledge too, just from being a midwife, but not everybody has that. And so I pretty quickly realized that some of these moms I was watching that were like returning to fitness in a way that I didn't feel like was appropriate, I thought to myself, and it really helps me when I start getting all up in arms about why are you doing that? What if someone took away an antidepressant, and was like, you can't have that right now for 6 weeks postpartum, until 6 weeks postpartum or longer? Like, what do I not know about the behind the scenes? It's just really helped me not to be so judgmental about each person's process. Yes, I believe that there are, benefits to doing a slow approach, but I know that for some people, the benefit, there might be a risk that I don't understand, and that benefit isn't as strong as the risk would be if they didn't start exercising, because that's how they manage their anxiety. So that's just kind of the story I make in my head to help me, but it's just different perspective. So I think I'll do things differently just because I know that not everybody has all the resources that I did. So that's going to be very different in coaching and in midwifery from now on.
That was a really beautiful answer. I'm really glad that I nudged you one final time. You really put that. It's a broad answer, right? And I did have it in my head that I wanted you to like give me these little specifics, but that's me. And I really appreciate the way you just expanded upon that in a way that can apply to anything and everything. It's really beautiful. I really thank you so much for sharing your story and your expertise and your perspective. Those are 3 very separate things, and you just brought all of them together so nicely. And I'll tell you the thing that you added to this conversation that I'm going to keep with me now is your 4 pillars. I love the way you say that. I say all of those things, but you just put it together so concisely. And I will be using that one for now on. So I am grateful for that. Thank you so much for coming back.
Oh, yeah, it's been great. It's always fun to share the birth story, and it's been great to have an opportunity to reflect on my return to fitness because, it's easy to just kind of get in it and be going through the motions. So it's good to slow down and kind of think about being deliberate and reflecting on how far I've come in just a few months. It's been a very intentional process. And honestly, a lot of people, I think they mean it in a nice way when they say, oh, wow, look at you just bouncing back. And I think if you only knew the deliberate sacrifices, I am really trying here to bounce back, and people just think that it's so easy, like you're just squeezing in your old leggings, but like, no, this has been a really deliberate process. And I think it can be like, I hope that more people, as a result of listening to this, think about how to structure that early postpartum period in a way that like they do have a foundation to build off of. And it's not just bouncing back. It can be really deliberate, progressive steps that get us to a place where we are stronger than before we had our babies. That's my goal. I want to be a stronger woman, a stronger mom, a stronger athlete as a result of these experiences.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mother Whip podcast. If any of the issues we discussed today resonate with you or your experience, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a voicemail at 917-310-0573, or better yet, email me a voice memo at tanya@motherwhipmaternity.com. I really want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, what support you'd wished you had, how you got through the tough times, how you advocated for yourself, or especially any tips you want to share with our listeners. I want to hear all of it. And if you'd really like to work together, you can get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwhipmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. Okay, that's all. It's wonderful being in community with you all. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.
And remember, listeners, nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care.